The day love slipped through our fingers. The transport vessel hummed softly as it descended through layers of purple clouds that wrapped around the planet like silk ribbons in the evening sky, and nobody on board expected their lives to change forever in the next few hours. But fate had other plans for them. All Captain Lisa Morgan sat in the command chair, watching the alien world grow larger on the view screen, and her fingers drummed against the armrest in a rhythm that matched her nervous heartbeat, because this was humanity's first official contact with the Velaryon people, and everything had to go perfectly or the alliance would crumble. Before it even began, Velaryons were beautiful beyond words, with skin that shimmered like pearls under moonlight and eyes that held depths of galaxies within them. And they stood taller than most humans, with graceful movements that made every gesture look like poetry in motion. And their technology was centuries ahead of Earth's, which made this meeting even more critical for humanity's survival in the vast universe. Standing beside Lisa was Lieutenant Amy Parker, who kept checking her tablet for the 100th time that morning, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun that made her look more serious than she actually was, and she worried about every small detail because she knew that one wrong move could doom the negotiations. Before they started, the ship touched down on a landing pad made of crystal that reflected light in ways that defied physics and created rainbows that danced across the hull. And when the doors opened, the air that rushed and smelled of flowers that didn't exist on Earth, mixed with something sweet and electric that made everyone's skin tingle with anticipation. Commodore Kate Sullivan led the diplomatic team down the ramp, and her dark eyes scanned the welcoming committee that waited at the base. And she had spent years preparing for this moment, studying Velaryon culture and language, until she could recite their poetry and understand their customs. But nothing had prepared her for actually standing before them in Persant. Velaryon representative stepped forward, and her name was something musical that human tongues struggled to pronounce, so she asked them to call her Lyra. And her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, and she wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight that flowed around her body in mesmerizing patterns. Lyra smiled, and it was the kind of smile that could make flowers bloom in winter. And she extended her hand in the human custom, and when Kate took it, she felt warmth spread through her entire body like sunshine on a cold morning, and for a moment the whole universe seemed to hold its breath. The negotiations took place in a grand hall with walls that were alive, somehow pulsing with soft bioluminescence and creating an atmosphere that felt both ancient and futuristic at the same time, and the discussions went smoothly. At first, with both sides presenting their terms and finding common ground on trade agreements and cultural exchange, but then something unexpected happened during a break in the formal talks, when Amy wandered into a garden area and found herself face to face with a young Velaryon named Sarah, who was studying a flowering plant that glowed in the dim light. And they started talking about biology and science, and discovered they shared the same passion for understanding life in all its forms. Sarah's eyes lit up when Amy described Earth's oceans and forests, and she told Amy about Velaryon crystal gardens where plants grew in mathematical spirals and sang in frequencies that could heal wounded souls. And they talked for hours, forgetting about time and duty and everything except the joy of finding someone who understood. Meanwhile, in another part of the complex, Lisa found herself walking through corridors with Lyra, who wanted to show her something special, and they climbed stairs that seemed to go on forever until they reached a viewing platform that overlooked the entire city. And it was breathtaking, with buildings that grew like trees and pathways that glowed like rivers of light. Lyra stood close to Lisa and pointed out landmarks while explaining the history of her people and how they had nearly destroyed themselves in wars long ago, before learning to live in harmony with their world and with each other. And Lisa felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't felt in years, since she devoted her life to serving in the fleet. They watched the twin suns set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. And Lyra turned to Lisa and said that she had never met anyone quite like her before, and that humans were more fascinating than any report had suggested. And Lisa felt her cheeks grow warm, and she smiled without meaning. Back in the negotiation hall, Kate was making progress on the final terms of the alliance, but she kept getting distracted by thoughts of Lyra and the way her presence seemed to fill every room she entered. And she scolded herself for being unprofessional, but couldn't shake the feeling that something profound was happening beneath the surface of these diplomatic exchanges. That evening there was a celebration feast with food that tasted like nothing humans had ever experienced before, and music that resonated in bones and made hearts beat in new rhythms. And Amy sat next to Sierra, and they laughed together about silly things and serious things and everything in between, and the barriers between their species seemed to melt away like ice, and Summerlisa danced with Lyra under lights that floated in the air like fireflies, and they moved together as if they had known each other for lifetimes instead of hours, and neither of them spoke, because words would have broken the spell that wrapped around them like a protective cocoon. Kate watched from the sidelines, feeling both happy for her crew and worried about what this all meant for the mission and for humanity's future, because she knew that emotions could complicate everything and turn simple agreements into tangled messes that took years to unravel. But then Lyra approached Kate and asked her to walk in the gardens, and they strolled among plants that hummed with life, and Lyra explained that her people believed love was the universe's way of connecting souls across impossible distances, and that denying such connections would be like denying gravity. Or like Kate listened and felt walls she had built around her heart begin to crack. And she admitted that she was drawn to Lyra in ways she didn't understand. And Lyra smiled that devastating smile and said that understanding wasn't necessary when the heart already knew the truth. Next morning brought harsh reality crashing down, when word came from Earth that the alliance needed to be finalized immediately, because threats from other hostile species were growing and humanity needed Velaryon technology to survive, and there was no time for delays or distractions. Liza called her crew together and explained that they had to finish negotiations and leave within 2 days, and Amy's face fell, and she looked like someone had stolen the sun from her sky, and Kate stood rigid, trying to maintain her professional composure. But everyone could see the pain in her eyes. The final day of talks was tense because both sides knew what was at stake, and the Velaryons offered generous terms for trade and technology sharing, but they also made it clear that they valued personal connections and hoped that humans would return often to deepen the bonds between their peoples. The treaty was signed. Lisa felt hollow inside, like she had won a battle but lost something far more valuable, and she avoided Lyra's gaze because she knew if she looked into those galactic eyes she might abandon everything. And Amy found Sierra in the garden one last time, and they held hands and cried together, because they both understood that the universe was vast and cruel and beautiful, and sometimes it brought people together only to tear them apart. And Sierra gave Amy a crystal that pulsed with soft light and told her it would always carry a piece of her essence. Kate stood with Lyra on the landing pad as the crew prepared to board, and Lyra touched Kate's face gently and said that endings were just beginnings in disguise, and that the threads connecting them would never break no matter how far apart they traveled through space. The transport lifted off, and Lisa watched through the view screen as the planet shrank below them, and she felt tears on her cheeks for the first time in years. And Amy sat clutching the crystal that Sierra had given her, and Kate stared at nothing, trying to process everything that had happened. And they returned to Earth as heroes who had secured humanity's future through the alliance, and everyone celebrated their success and praised their diplomatic skills. And nobody knew about the hearts they had left behind on a distant world. Under purple skies months passed, and Lisa threw herself into new missions, trying to forget. But every sunset reminded her of Lyra, and Amy studied the crystal for hours, searching for meaning in its patterns, and Kate wrote reports that never mentioned the real reason she wanted to return to the Velaryon homeworld. Then one day a message arrived through the new communication channels, and it was from Lyra inviting humanity to send representatives for a cultural festival, and Lisa's hands shook as she read it. And Amy jumped up with joy, and Kate smiled for the first time in months. The universe had given them a second chance, and this time they would not let it slip through their fingers, because love was worth fighting for, even across the stars, even between species that had just met, even when logic said it was impossible.